the secret lives of the women who ran brothels in the gold rush. The room that was never cold. She never chose the room, it chose her. Tucked at the far end of the upstairs hallway, where the wallpaper peeled like old promises and the floorboards no longer dared to groan. The room was always ready, always made, always clean, but no one ever stayed in it. It was the room they passed by quickly. It's the one the girls avoided with silent glances. The one that never gathered dust, though no one ever cleaned it, because that room remembered, and no one wanted to know what it remembered. They called it the cold room, but that was a lie. It was never cold. In summer, it remained shaded and cool, but not dead. In winter, when frost clawed at the glass, the room never iced. Candles left on the nightstand never flickered, never went out. The fire in the hearth, lit on its own once, no one asked who lit it. No one confessed, but she knew that room didn't need a flame to be warm. It had its own heat, a heat that came not from fire, but from memory, from breath still caught between the walls. For moments, no one was willing to claim. She first stepped into it when the house was new, back when the paint was still wet, and the mirrors still believed they reflected truth. She was younger then, sharper, more willing to lie to herself. She walked in, just to inspect it. No guests hadn't come yet. But the moment she crossed the threshold, she knew this room had already hosted something. Something old, something unfinished. She stood still, felt her heartbeat echo off the floorboards, and thought, this room has been waiting for me. Others never slept there, even when the house overflowed. When men lined the halls and the other beds were taken, that room stayed untouched. Oh, they tried once. A man named Fletcher, big, loud, gold around his neck and rot in his soul. He insisted on that room, said he liked the way it smelled of privacy. He entered with a girl named Elsie. She didn't want to go, but gold spoke louder than hesitation. 15 minutes later, the door slammed open. Elsie stumbled out, shaking. Fletcher followed, pale and furious. He slapped coins onto the bar and left without a word, never returned. Elsie never spoke of what happened, only said, quietly, there was someone already in there. After that, the door stayed closed, but not locked. The handle was always warm, like it had just been held. And sometimes, when the night grew quiet and the men stopped pretending, they'd hear a creak, not footsteps, not movement, just the sound of a bed settling, as if someone had just lain down or just gotten up. She began checking the room once a week, not to clean it, cut to see if anything had changed. The bed was always made. The mirror never fogged. Curtains stayed drawn but not tightly, as if someone inside liked the light, but not too much. Once, she left a candle burning on the table. The next morning was gone. In its place, a red ribbon tied in a loose knot. She kept it, didn't ask why. She didn't need to. Some rooms speak, a language you learn through silence. Years passed, the house aged, ghosts came and went, but the room stayed the same, ageless, waiting. It wasn't haunted, not in the traditional sense. It didn't moan, didn't scream, didn't bleed, but it held breath, held glances, held the weight of what women carried when no one let them set it down. She once asked the mirror a question, who are you waiting for? And for a moment, she thought the reflection answered not with words, but with recognition, like the face staring back wasn't her, but a version that had never left the room. Then one night, during a thunderstorm that made even the piano go quiet, she opened the door again, and there, on the bed, folded perfectly, was a letter, no stamp, no handwriting, just blank paper. But when she picked it up, it was warm, like it had been pressed against someone's chest, held with purpose. She sat on the bed carefully, respectfully, and held it in her lap. The thunder cracked of the candle flickered, and somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice said, "You were never the hostess. You were always the guest." She knew every sound that walls shouldn't make. She knew the difference between footsteps and memories. Most people didn't. They heard creaks and called them age. They heard wind and called it weather. But she had lived long enough inside walls that never forgot. She knew when the sound came from the wood and when it came from something deeper, because walls remember, especially in houses like this, especially when so many secrets were told just loud enough for the wallpaper to listen. At first, it was simple things. A knock with no visitor, sigh with no mouth, the drag of something soft across the floorboards when everyone was asleep. But then came the whispering, not words, not language, just sound, low, soft, pressed between the cracks like breath. Trying to escape the past, she asked the carpenter once, the one who repaired the window near the red room, if houses could hold voices. He laughed, said, "Only if they've been taught to." She didn't laugh with him, because she had taught this house everything it knew. She began to hear it most when she stood near the walls. Not the front ones, those were loud, full of drunken men and sharp laughter, but the back ones, the ones closest to the cold room, the ones that had never been painted twice. They whispered when the girls cried. They whispered when a man lied. And sometimes they whispered before either of those things happened. She pressed her hand to one once, felt a thrum, not like a heartbeat, but like something trying to remember how to breathe. She whispered back, "I'm still listening." And the sound stopped, not in fear, but in relief. There was one wall, just one, that bled, not with blood, with ink. One morning, she found a thin black streak running from the edge of a picture frame to the floor. No one had touched it. No bottle had spilled. She wiped it away. But the next day, it was back. This time, it had a shape, curve, like the beginning of a letter. By the end of the week, it had formed one word: stay. The girls didn't know. She didn't tell them. Not because she wanted to protect them, that illusion had long burned away, but because some truths become more dangerous when shared, and this truth was still forming, still curling through the frame and the beams, still deciding if it was going to help her or haunt her. One evening, a man came to the brothel with a map, said he was looking for a room that had no shadows. She told him all rooms have shadows. Even if they hide, he said, this one's different. It listens, it waits. He described it perfectly, down to the peeling corner of wallpaper near the fireplace. She told him it didn't exist. He didn't believe her, but he left, and she never saw him again. After that, the house got louder. The walls no longer whispered, they called. Low moans like hunger, rattles like bones trying to rise, cracks like someone pressing too hard from the inside out. She stopped standing too close, but even in the middle of a room, she could hear it. The house was remembering too fast, and memory, when rushed, becomes something else, a haunting. She wrote notes to herself, slipped them under door frames, hid them in cracks, burned some in the fireplace when the whispering got too loud. One note said, "You are the echo, not the voice." Another said, "Don't knock back," but she did. One night, just once, 3 taps, soft, measured the wall, answered with 4, and then silence, and then something smiled, not on her face, from somewhere inside her bones, like a memory had returned home. She dreamed, after that, of staircases with no end, of mirrors that showed her hands, but not her face, of doors that opened to other versions of herself, each more tired, more silent, more real. She woke up with dust on her palms, splinters in her feet. One night, even a lipstick mark on her collar that wasn't hers. The house was telling her something, not about the past, but about the room, the one that was never cold, the one that never needed a guest to be occupied. She began to understand. She hadn't kept the room empty. The room had kept her full. Of what? She didn't know yet, but the walls did, and they were almost ready to tell her. The bed that no one touched, but was never empty. There was dust on the windowsill, on the shelves, even on the candles, but never on the bed. Not once. She checked often, not out of fear, but curiosity, a compulsion, maybe, something primal and silent in her bones that whispered, see if it changed. It never did. The pillows were always fluffed, the sheets always smooth, tight like a lie told too many times. The blanket always folded back as if someone had just gotten up, or worse, never left. No one ever saw her clean it. She didn't, and neither did the girls. They'd dust the shelves, wipe the mirror, light incense by the door, but the bed, they wouldn't go near it. Not anymore. After Lily found the imprint, it was a quiet afternoon, the kind that never lasted long. Lily had gone in to open the window. A storm was coming, and the air inside had turned heavy, phallic, like the taste of regret before you speak it. She pulled the curtain, paused, turned, and froze. The blanket was perfect, but the indentation was there, a shallow dip in the center of the bed, as if someone had been lying there moments before. But the room was locked, always locked, and still. It was warm. Lily came to her, shaking. She didn't ask what she saw. She just nodded, lit a candle out, and that night slept in the hallway instead. The bed was never used by guests. Even the boldest men avoided it. They claimed it looked too stiff, or too soft, or too knowing. One said it reminded him of his mother. Another said it smelled like someone else's dream, but none of them touched it. Even the ones who would touch anything. She once sat on the edge of the bed, just to see that her weight didn't sink it. The surface gave just enough, but it pushed back, like a body already lying beneath the surface, refusing to move. She stood up quickly, not afraid, but not welcome either. She began leaving things on the bed. A handkerchief, a book with a broken spine, a broken watch. Every time she returned, the object had moved, just slightly. A corner turned, a page opened. The watch ticking for a few seconds longer. She never asked for it back. She just left it there, as if she were feeding something once. She dared to pull back the blanket completely. Beneath, the sheets were white, too white, unreal, untouched, not a single thread out of place. But when she leaned in, she smelled something, salt-like, ocean air, or old tears. She stepped back, let the blanket fall. Can whispered, "You're not alone." "I know." And the mirror across the room fogged, just for a moment. One girl, new and bold, tried to nap in the bed. They warned her. She laughed, called them superstitious, said ghosts were for children and cowards. She lay down, closed her eyes. 10 minutes later, she screamed, not loud, just sharp, like a dog hit by something it never saw. They found her on the floor, shaking, eyes wide. She wouldn't say what happened, only that she felt someone breathing beside her, not on her neck, not on her chest, inside her. She left that night, left town, left her shoes behind, in the bed, still made, still waiting. Sometimes, when she walked past the room, she swore she saw the blanket rise just a bit, like someone had taken a deep breath beneath it, or like something underneath had remembered what lungs were for. She told herself it was imagination, a trick of the light, a lie made of need. But some lies are so old, they forget they aren't true. And this one had started to breathe. She considered moving the bed. Once, just once, she called 2 men, strong, trusted, paid in advance. They entered the room, sized it up, laid hands on the frame, then froze. One of them whispered, "It's warm." The other said, "It's humming." They both let go at the same time, backed out, refused payment, and she didn't ask again. Because the truth was this: she didn't want the bed moved. Not really. She didn't want to know what lay beneath it, what memory, what version of herself, what story left half-written in the folds of linen and time. Some furniture isn't made of wood and nails, okay? Some is made of sorrow, and sorrow sleeps deeply. Now, she passes the bed like a grave she visits too often. She nods, leaves the door open, just slightly, lets the light from the hallway spill in like a guest who's late but welcome. And sometimes, when she's alone, she says goodnight, not to the bed, but to the version of herself that still lies there, still hoping someone will pull back the covers and say, "You're allowed to leave now." But no one ever does, and she never has. What the sheets remembered, even when she forgot. There's something about sheets. They remember differently than walls. Walls echo, floors groan, doors judge, but sheets, they keep. Not like a ledger, not like a photo, but like skin. Soft, close, intimate. They don't shout what they know. They absorb, and they never give it back. She didn't change the sheets in that room, not once, not even after the fire. Everything else had burned or blistered, but the sheets, they were still there, folded, white, untouched. When she reached to touch them after the fire, her fingers hesitated. Not out of fear, but reverence. The cotton still smelled of lavender, of warmth, of something that had wept itself into the fabric and dried without resentment. She once dreamed she was wrapped in them, not in sleep, but in grief. The sheets clung to her like arms that didn't want to let go. They whispered things, not in words, but in temperature, each fold warmer or colder, depending on what she needed to remember. In that dream, she wept, not because she was sad, but because the sheets knew her and didn't ask her to be anything else. She began sleeping in the room, not every night, but sometimes when the house was too full of memory and her own skin felt too loud. She'd lie on top of the covers, never beneath, face up, eyes open, listening to the walls, to the creak of her own breath, to the weight of things that had never spoken but had always stayed. And the sheets didn't move, but they held her without arms, without conditions, without asking if she was ready. They simply remembered. There were nights she'd wake up with words on her skin, not bruises, not ink dot, just the impression of letters, formed by the folds, shaped by the way the fabric wrapped around her thigh, her shoulder, her spine. She never told the girls, but once. She traced the shape left across her stomach and read it out loud. Still here. It was the kind of sentence you don't speak, unless you mean it. And the sheets never lied. One night, a storm cracked open the sky. The roof leaked. The girls screamed as thunder shook their teeth. But not in that room. In that room, it was quiet, dry still. She stood in the doorway, watching the sheets glow faintly in the candlelight, untouched by wind or water. She stepped inside, closed the door, laid her hand flat on the center of the bed, and for the first time, the sheets moved. Not from breeze, not from her, from something beneath. A rise, a fall, a slow, careful breath, like the bed itself was exhaling. She didn't pull away. She whispered, "I know." And the room warmed. She started leaving objects again, this time personal ones. A comb, an old ribbon, a photograph that had no faces left. Each morning, the item would be moved. Not far, okay? Just enough to let her know it had been seen, held, acknowledged it. Was the sheets. She knew that now. They didn't speak in words, okay, but in position, in temperature, in the way they folded or stayed flat depending on what she needed. One morning, she found them tangled, twisted in a spiral, the kind someone makes when fleeing a nightmare, but no one had slept there, except maybe a version of her that still wandered in dreams she no longer remembered. She washed her hands constantly now, not out of habit, but because she felt fabric on her fingers when nothing was there. A ghost of cotton, of memory, of comfort. One night, she whispered to the sheets, "Tell me what I forgot." And in the dark, she felt a weight beside her, a presence, not threatening, not familiar, but earned. Something she had once given away, and had now returned, not as a lover, not as a child, not even as a friend, just as truth, wrapped in thread, stitched in silence, folded in time. She cried into the sheets that night, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for the fabric to absorb the grief without judgment. And when she woke, the pillow was dry. They didn't need her to remember everything. They remembered enough for both of them, and as long as they stayed, folded, tucked, she could keep forgetting until she was ready, or until the room decided she no longer had to. The night the mirror refused to reflect her face. There was a mirror in the room. It hadn't been polished in years. Didn't need to be, because no matter the dust, no matter the flicker of candlelight or the curl of steam from her breath, always showed her, always her, exactly as she was, exactly as she tried not to be, until it day, in single quotes, it happened in the middle of a sentence. She wasn't talking to anyone, just muttering to herself. She often did when the house was quiet enough to answer. She'd sat on the edge of the bed, brushing out her hair with slow, repetitive strokes, as if the rhythm could comb through more than just strands, as if it could untangle memories too. The mirror stood across the room, tall, framed in wood, too dark to name. A slight crack at the top corner, one she had stopped noticing years ago. She looked up just for a second, just to catch her own eyes, but they weren't there. Her body was a silhouette, it's the outline of shoulders hunched in thought, but her face, gone, just blank glass, not empty, just absent, like the mirror had forgotten what she looked like, or chosen not to remember. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, still nothing. She waved a hand in front of her face. The movement echoed in the reflection, arm, wrist, fingers, but no features, no expression, no self. She stood up slowly, walked across the room. Her breath left fog on the glass, but it outlined nothing, not a nose, not lips, not the furrow. In her brow she always saw when she wasn't thinking, just emptiness wrapped in skin. The shell of a woman who had stayed too long in a house that kept everything except her. She whispered, "Why?" And the mirror shivered, just slightly. Ripple, as if the glass had flinched. She thought of covering it, dragging a sheet over the frame, turning it to face the wall. But something inside her said, "No, watch it, not see you. That's how you learn who you really are." That night, the girl said, the house felt lighter. No creaks, no whispers, no sighs behind the wallpaper. It was like the brothel had taken a deep breath after years of holding it in. But she didn't sleep. She sat on the floor in front of the mirror, legs crossed, eyes open, waiting to reappear. She stared at the blankness, the ghost of a woman who had lost her shape, and she asked herself, not out loud, but with the ache behind her ribs, what part of me did I bury to survive here? The mirror didn't answer, not with reflection, not with words, but the room got warmer, slowly, gently, like someone had just walked in carrying fire in their chest, and in that warmth, she felt it, the pieces of herself she had scattered over, the years in men's mouths, in candle wax, screams pressed into pillows. They hadn't disappeared, they had just retreated into walls, into sheets, into mirrors that knew when to stop reflecting until she was ready to see. Morning came. The window glowed pale. The dust on the frame turned golden. She stood again, looked once more. This time her face returned, but not all at once. First, the outline, then the jaw, then the mouth. The eyes came last, and when they did, they were crying, not visibly, not with tears, but with something older, something that had been waiting to be seen. She touched the mirror. It was warm, almost alive, and just for a moment, it blinked. Not her. It, like the mirror, had grown tired of seeing what she wouldn't, and now that it had, needed to rest. She covered it, finally, not with fear, not with shame, but with permission. Some reflections don't need to be permanent. Some truths are meant to be seen once, just long enough to break you, rebuild you softer. When the girls asked why she covered it, she said, "Because I saw myself, and that's enough for now." They didn't ask more. They never did, because deep down, they each had a mirror too. Oh, and none of them really wanted to know what would happen if they'd ever stopped looking back. The woman who slept standing up, she never lay down, not because she didn't want to, not because she didn't need rest, but because she had learned, somewhere between grief and repetition, that lying down meant letting go, and she didn't let go. Not ever so. She stood at windows, in corners, by beds she never touched, and when exhaustion folded itself into her bones like an old letter, she slept that way on her feet, back straight, eyes closed, unmoving, like a soldier, like a statue, like someone waiting for permission to collapse. They noticed, of course, the girls, the way her boots never came off, the way her shoulders carried something invisible, something worn but never dropped. They asked her once, "Why don't you rest?" And she answered, "Because the moment I do, taint, this place will remember what I buried." She hadn't always been that way. There was a time when she slept like the dead limbs tangled, face soft, breath steady, like a song no one had ruined yet. But that was before the knock, before the note under the door, before the room at the end of the hall learned her name. It wasn't an event that broke her. It was an accumulation, slow erosion, the way sand slips grain by grain into the hem of your dress until you're sinking, and don't even notice the tide has changed. She tried once to lie down, to pretend the bed was just furniture and not a witness. She closed her eyes, counted breaths, let the darkness press in just enough to test her softness. But then a voice, her own, saying something she didn't remember saying. "Get up, she's watching." She sat bolt upright, alone, and from that moment on, she never risked falling asleep beneath anything again. They said she was strange, difficult, detached, but what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that sleep had become a door, and she didn't trust what might walk through it while she was gone. Instead, she learned to rest like ghosts do, quietly, softly, in corners that didn't ask questions. She'd lean against door frames, close her eyes just enough, let the noise of the brothel lull her into a place just on the edge of rest not sleep. Stillness, enough to survive, never enough to dream. She heard everything in that half-sleep, the whispers behind walls, the sobs muffled in pillows, the men saying names that weren't theirs, the lies women told themselves before dawn so they could keep breathing. She became a living piece of the house, an eavesdropper to emotion, a shadow that listened, a sentinel of silence, and in return, the house kept her upright, like it knew if she fell, no one else would remember what had been lost here. One night, a girl came into the room crying, new, young, fragile in the way glass pretends to be strong. She found a woman standing in the corner, eyes closed, arms crossed. "Are you awake?" she asked. No answer. She stepped closer. "Why do you stand like that?" Still nothing. But as she turned to leave, the woman spoke, because lying down would make it real. The girl didn't understand, but years later, after she buried her first child, after her husband died with a secret in his pocket, after she came back to the town she swore she'd forget, She stood in that same room, looked at the dustless floor, and whispered, "Now I understand." There was power in standing, in resisting gravity, in saying to the weight of memory, "You can pull, but I will not fall." But even statues crack, even stone wears thin, and one night she did fall, not far, not loud, just a soft slip, knees to floor, head against the doorframe. The house trembled, the lights flickered, and from deep in the walls, a sound like mourning, like something had just ended, or just begun. When they found her, she was still breathing, eyes open, unblinking. She looked up and said, "I saw the bed move, and I didn't stop it." Then she stood, brushed the dust from her skirt, and for the first time in years, she lay down just for a minute, and the house went silent, not out of fear, but out of respect. The closet had knocked back. The closet was small, narrow, dark, and old enough that no one quite remembered who built it. The door never closed fully, even when forced. It stayed cracked, just wide enough to make people uneasy, but not wide enough to see what waited inside at first. No one paid attention. It was just a place to hang coats, space for dust and forgotten shoes. But then it knocked. The first time she thought it was a rat, the wood expanding, the wind, but the knock came again. 3 soft, deliberate taps. From the inside, she stood, still, hand resting on the doorknob. Didn't open it, didn't ask, just whispered, "Not tonight." And the closet was silent. She told no one. Some truths, when shared too early, become fear. She needed time to decide if this was memory or haunting. The second knock came a week later. Same rhythm, same place. This time, she sat across the room, candle burning low. She didn't move, just watched the door, waited. Eventually, the flame flickered, and the knocking stopped. But from then on, she began to wonder if the closet was a door to something more than dust and linen. Maybe it was a threshold. One girl tried to sleep with the door open, just a sliver, just enough to see the inside. In the morning, she was gone. Not her body, her voice. She could still move, still breathe, but no sound would leave her lips, not for 3 days. And when she finally spoke again, she said, "There's a woman in there. She remembers all our names, but not her own." They never opened it again. She began leaving offerings, small ones, a torn page from a diary, a lock of hair no longer wanted, a scrap, a fabric that once held perfume, each placed gently inside the closet, each gone by morning. In return, the closet stayed silent. For a while, the knocking returned. The night a man raised his hand to one of the girls. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She just looked at him with eyes that said, "You're not the first." He stepped back, laughed, said something cruel, and then the closet door slammed shut. Hard, the sound echoed through the house. Everyone froze. The man paled, stumbled backward. He left. No one followed. And from that night on, the closet became something else. Not a storage space, a guardian. She spoke to it sometimes, in passing, not with fear, with respect. "I know you're not empty. Q. For listening. Don't forget me." She never expected answers. But once, in the deepest part of winter, when her bones ached from silence and her memories itched like healing scars, she sat beside it, placed her back against the door, closed her eyes, and the closet knocked. Once, slow, soft, as if saying, "You're not alone." She smiled, not because she believed it, but because the knock had come in the exact rhythm of her own heartbeat, and for the first time, they were in sync. Later, when the house stood abandoned, the new owners tried to remove the closet, said it made guests uncomfortable, but every time they hired someone, the workers would leave mid-task. One said he heard humming, another said he saw eyes. One man simply dropped his tools and whispered, I can't unsee it. No one asked what it was, because some doors don't open. They remember. And that's worse. The closet still stands, door slightly ajar. Shadows always deeper than the rest of the room, okay? And every now and then, knocks. And somewhere far away, a woman who once stood for too long and slept too little closes her eyes, places a hand over her heart, and knocks back the key she was given and never used. It came wrapped in lace, tucked inside a small wooden box, tied with ribbon so thin it looked like it might dissolve in breath. No note, not message, no explanation, just the key, simple, iron, worn at the edges, as if it had been turned too many times in locks that resisted its purpose. She held it in her hand for nearly an hour, studying it, weighing it, not for the metal it was made of, but for the silence it carried. It felt like a confession, one left unsigned. She didn't ask where it came from. She had her suspicions. A woman doesn't live among ghosts without learning to recognize the gifts they leave behind. And this was a gift, or a threat, or both, because not all keys open doors. Some lock them forever. The key had no obvious match. She tried the obvious places: drawers, cabinets, chests left behind in the attic. Nothing. She even tried the front door of the brothel, though she knew the shape didn't fit. Still, she turned it slowly, like a prayer with no God, no click, no resistance, just emptiness, the kind of emptiness that waits. She kept it with her after that, in her pocket, under her pillow, tied to a string around her neck, hidden beneath the collar of a blouse. No one ever complimented. It warmed sometimes when she walked by the cold room. She sat in silence too long. When someone said her name too gently once during a storm, Kaya, it burned hot enough to leave a mark on her chest, a small red curve, not quite a circle, more like a question left unfinished. The girls asked about it. She never answered. But one night, when one of them lingered too close to the door of the red room, the key rang softly against her skin, like a bell. She turned to the girl and said, "You don't knock on a door that already knows you're there." The girl never went near the room again. She dreamt of the key often. In one dream, she held it in her mouth. In another, it grew into a tree from her palm. In the most vivid, she unlocked a door buried in the center of her chest, and behind it was herself, not younger, not older, just unfinished. She woke with tears on her collarbone and dirt under her nails. She considered destroying it. She set it on the hearth one morning, lit a fire, watched the flames dance and stretch, but the key never blackened, never glowed, just sat there, cold, defiant, as if saying, "I don't belong to fire, I belong to choice." She understood then. The key was hers, but the door it opened might not be. She tried forgetting it, left it in drawers, tucked it between pages of books, dropped it behind furniture, but it always found her again, on her pillow, in her shoe, once tucked into the fold of a letter sheet. Never written, but somehow recognized. She stopped fighting it, started talking to it. Small things. What do you want from me? Where did I lose you? What will happen if I finally say yes? The key never answered, but sometimes it trembled. One morning, the piano played 3 notes, low, mournful. She hadn't heard it in weeks. She followed the sound to the hallway, outside the red room, and there, on the floor, was a single word scratched into the wood. "Ready?" She clutched the key, but didn't move. Not yet, because some doors aren't waiting to be opened. They're waiting to see. You will open yourself first, and some keys don't fit into locks. They fit into moments. Moments when memory grows heavier, then fear. Moments when truth no longer asks politely. Moments when a woman, tired of carrying other people's ghosts, finally asks, "What part of me did I seal away to survive?" She still hasn't used the key. Not because she's afraid, but because she knows the moment she does, nothing will be the same. And maybe that's the point. The fire took everything, except that room. The fire didn't roar. It whispered. It began like everything else in that house had, quietly, without permission, with the dignity of something that knew it had already been earned. No crash, no scream, just a flicker in the dark. By the time anyone smelled smoke, it had already chosen what it would take, and what it would leave behind. They screamed, of course. The girls, not out of fear, but recognition, because every woman in that house had dreamed of burning it down at least once. Every woman had imagined the flames licking away the memories, the names, the stains no soap ever reached. But when the fire came for real, it wasn't angry. It was intentional, almost intimate, like it had been waiting for the moment when the house was tired enough to let go. She didn't run. She stood in the hallway, barefoot, watching the smoke curl like fingers around the banister. The wallpaper peeled away like secrets that could no longer hold themselves together. Pictures fell. The piano played one final, broken note. She whispered, "Take what you came for." And the fire obeyed. It took the red room, took the parlor, took the velvet drapes and the whiskey stains and the lipstick marks on mirrors. It took every room that had held a scream, every hallway that had swallowed a name, every door that had stayed shut too long. But it did not take that room, the one at the end of the hall, the cold one, the one with the bed that never aged, the one with the key that was never used. When the smoke cleared, the house was a skeleton, charred, broken, bent, but that room, untouched, not a single burn mark, not a single crack in the mirror, the sheets still white, the floor still warm. The door had closed itself and locked. The girls wept in the street, holding each other, called in the only home they'd known crumble like a lie caught in daylight. But she stared at the room, knew immediately what had happened. The fire had come for history, not for memory. In that room wasn't history. It was alive. They tried to open it after, with axes, with crowbars. The wood wouldn't budge, not burned, not cracked, as if the flames had kissed it and said, "Not yet." Days passed, then weeks. They slept where they could, breathed smoke even after the air cleared, started saying things like, "When we rebuild, and maybe it's for the best." But she knew better, because the house had been more than wood. It had been a vessel, and that room was still full, still waiting. One morning, she returned alone. No one followed. She stood before the door, key in hand, chest heavy with a silence that had waited too long. She said nothing, just pressed her palm to the wood, and for the first time since the fire, the room exhaled. The handle turned. Inside, nothing had changed. The bed was made. The mirror was whole. The ribbon still lay folded on the nightstand and on the pillow. The key, not the one she brought, another dot, older, thinner, shaped like a question, too fragile to speak aloud. She took it in her hand, felt the weight of every version of herself she had buried to survive, and understood the fire had taken what no longer served. But this room still knew who she had been before the forgetting. She sat on the bed for the first time, not like a guest, not like a ghost, but like a woman finally home in a version of herself that could hold the flame without being consumed. Outside, a breeze carried ash across the street. Inside, the walls hummed softly a lullaby, perhaps, or the sound of memory settling back into its rightful shape. The fire didn't roar, it whispered. It began like everything else in that house had, quietly, without permission, with the dignity of something that knew it had already been earned. No crash, no scream, just a flicker in the dark By the time anyone smelled smoke, it had already chosen what it would take, and what it would leave behind. They screamed, of course. The girls, not out of fear, but recognition, because every woman in that house had dreamed of burning it down at least once. Every woman had imagined the flames licking away the memories, the names, the stains no soap ever reached. But when the fire came for real, it wasn't angry, it was intentional almost. Intimate, like it had been waiting for the moment when the house was tired enough to let go. She didn't run. She stood in the hallway, barefoot, watching the smoke curl like fingers around the banister. The wallpaper peeled away like secrets that could no longer hold themselves together. Pictures fell. The piano played one final broken note. She whispered, "Take what you came for." And the fire obeyed. It took the red room, took the parlor, took the velvet drapes and the whiskey stains and the lipstick marks on mirrors. It took every room that had held a scream, every hallway that had swallowed a name, every door that had stayed shut too long. But it did not take that room, the one at the end of the hall, the cold one, the one with the bed that never aged, the one with a key that was never used when the smoke cleared. The house was a skeleton, charred, broken, bent, but that room untouched, not a single burn mark, not a single crack in the mirror, the sheets still white, the floor still warm. The door had closed itself and locked. The girls wept in the street, holding each other, watching the only home they'd known crumble like a lie caught in daylight. But she stared at the room, knew immediately what had happened. The fire had come for history, not for memory. And that room wasn't history. It was alive. They tried to open it after, with axes, with crowbars. The wood wouldn't budge, not burned, not cracked, as if the flames had kissed it and said, "Not yet." Days passed, then weeks. They slept where they could, breathed smoke even after the air cleared, started saying things like, "When we rebuild, and maybe it's for the best." But she knew better, because the house had been more than wood. It had been a vessel, and that room was still full, still waiting. One morning, she returned alone. No one followed. She stood before the door, key in hand, chest heavy with a silence that had waited too long. She said nothing, just pressed her palm to the wood, and for the first time since the fire, the room exhaled. The handle turned. Inside, nothing had changed. The bed was made. The mirror was whole. The ribbon still lay folded on the nightstand and on the pillow. The key, not the one she brought, another dot, older, thinner, shaped like a question too fragile to speak aloud. She took it in her hand, felt the weight of every version of herself she had buried to survive, and understood the fire had taken what no longer served. But this room still knew who she had been before the forgetting. She sat on the bed for the first time, not like a guest, not like a ghost, but like a woman finally home in a version of herself that could hold the flame without being consumed. Outside, a breeze carried ash across the street. Inside, the walls hummed softly a lullaby, perhaps, or the sound of memory settling back into its rightful shape. She was the guest all along. She once believed she owned the house, the rules, the stories, the rooms that whispered her name long after the men forgot it. She walked its halls like a queen. Silence was her crown. Pain was her language. She thought she was his guardian, its builder, its center. But the house had never belonged to her. Not really, because you can't own a place that remembers you better than you remembered yourself. And now she knew she was never the host. She was always the guest. The room had been waiting for her, not just through the fire, not just through the years, but long before she ever arrived. before her name was lost, before her voice cracked from disuse. The room had existed in the blueprint of her grief, in the echo of her survival. It was never meant to be rented. It was meant to be returned to. She sat there now, hands folded, eyes closed, the bed beneath her still warm, the air still fragrant with lavender and a memory she couldn't name. She didn't need to speak. The room understood. It had always understood, because it had seen the versions of her that no one else stayed long enough to recognize: the child, the mother, the warrior, the girl who cried in stairwells, the woman who wiped blood from mirrors and called it routine. They had all passed through here, and none had overstayed. Only she had. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the first key, the one she never used, and placed it gently on the nightstand. Then, the second, the one she found on the pillow after the fire. She placed that one on the floor, beside her shoes, then stood, walked to the mirror, looked, and this time she saw everyone, every version, every wound, every laugh she had stifled, every time she had chosen silence over begging. All of them, not ghosts, not regrets, witnesses. She smiled, and the mirror smiled back. Not perfectly, but sincerely. She nodded to the reflection and said, "You waited." Now I remember. Outside, the wind carried no ash, only dust and beginnings. Inside, the room breathed once more, not in sadness, in relief. The guest had come home, not to stay forever, but to finally say goodbye. She didn't leave through the front door. She left through the back, where no one ever arrived. But everyone eventually went. Shoes soft on the path, ribbon tied in her hair, the way her mother once did. She didn't take anything, because nothing belonged to her, and everything already lived inside her. The house didn't collapse, didn't vanish. It simply grew quiet, not dead, just complete. Years passed, no one rebuilt, but travelers swore the wind sang there, said the old foundation whispered in storms, said the roses bloomed without soil, and the bed never aged. They said a mirror still stood at the center of the earth beneath the floor, and sometimes, if you looked into it with your whole soul exposed, it would show you the version of yourself you tried to forget, and ask gently, "Are you finally ready to come in?" Because some places were never meant to be homes. They were meant to be reminders, and some women, the ones who carried too much and asked for too little, were never the hosts of their own pain. They were guests in it until they learned they could leave. The end.